Kayla was a 32-year-old woman with 2 children who called the counseling center looking for a therapist. She was frustrated and overwhelmed professionally and personally. She admitted that she needed help in dealing with her anxiety and occasional angry outbursts. Her therapist encountered her as a reasonably professionally dressed woman with good social skills who presented during the intake session to be perpetually on edge about her husband, children, and her co-workers. Kayla tensely explained that she worked in retail management and felt her job was especially stressful due to her employees never doing what they are supposed to do. Admittedly, when she arrived at home, she had the same feelings regarding her husband and children. She described a long list of minor transgressions that her 3 children have committed. That may seem small in and of themselves, but has added up to be a much bigger mess. They never remembered to pick up their clothes in the bathroom and put them in the laundry hamper, or to remember to put the lid back on the peanut butter and place it back in the pantry, and they failed to put their dirty dishes in the sink, and they failed to turn off their cell phones at bedtime or finish their homework without prompting. Similarly, she felt that her husband, although described as a hard-working and loyal man who appears to take his role in their relationship seriously, did not make enough effort to do the things she wants from him. Kayla became tired of explaining to her husband where she wanted to eat when he offered or about what she needed from him when she was tired, sad, or lonely. Life appeared to be a constant source of pressure on Kayla to do for others and compensate for their shortcomings. She couldn't see herself not filling in all the blanks and over-functioning in this way, and she frequently cried in the therapist's office about this stress and frustration. After one particularly stressful day at work, where she needed to coach a few salespeople on company policy, she came in for her appointment and railed tearfully in frustration and exasperation at the idea that I always have to tell people at work what to do and enforce the rules, and then I go home and my kids can't figure out what they need to do either. My husband never knows what I want or need from him emotionally, and I have to tell him what I need at the end of every day too. I shouldn't always have to tell others what I need and expect from them. Well, you're probably right. That's the first thing I think when I hear somebody saying this, either in session or in my normal life. It would be a wonderful thing if everybody was more self-disciplined and was capable of doing the right thing out of conscience, where the rules didn't need to be enforced. I am in 100% agreement with that sentiment. I'd like to see everyone's memory just all of a sudden expand by 10 times over when it comes to remembering to do simple things like shutting the kitchen cabinets when you're done, taking something out of them, putting something back in them, or remembering to pick up dirty clothes off the floor, or remember to send thank you cards for graduation or birthday gifts. I'm on board with this too. I especially would love to see a world full of more perceptive people who can perceive others' needs and their feelings and know where personal boundaries start and end without having to go through the painful process of trying to explain to others what and why and where they are. This sounds a whole lot better than the world we're living in right now, doesn't it? It would certainly be a world with a lot less confusion, and a world that needed a lot less authority and consequences to be administered for when the rules were broken, and a world where we could all save years and years worth of personal energy. Just talking about it makes me want to buy a ticket and jump on the next shuttle heading to this ideal world, and I'm guessing you'd probably agree. Now that we've gotten that out of the way and we are all in an agreement that we shouldn't have to tell everybody repeatedly what's right and what's needed or what goes where and why, we can begin to objectively analyze why this is not a good thing to tell yourself and why this falls into the category of toxic words. The first reason that I would challenge this statement as being essentially true, even though it feels that way, is that it is wishful thinking. It is in denial of basic human nature. It does not take a behaviorally trained researcher to understand that human beings do not like to do unpleasant tasks, even if those tasks are generally good for them. nor do they like to spend mental energy on repetitive or boring duties that do not benefit themselves, nor are gratifying. Anyone who has ever had children knows that children are consumers. They only want to do what is enjoyable, fun, and interesting in that moment. And that trying to motivate a child to produce anything of value is a fascinating chess game that is challenging and lengthy struggle. Left to themselves, kids will destroy any environment that they are allowed to have dominion over, and they will consume anything and everything they can get their hands on. They will leave nothing as it should be or where it belongs. If you're ready to argue this point with me, then I would either question your integrity or your sanity, perhaps both. You would think that this problem would be naturally corrected when small children get older and grow up into adulthood, and that there should be a natural transition to not being needed to be told what to do and when to do it and why. But it doesn't work that way either. One of my favorite things to say is everybody is all excited to eat, but nobody likes to shop, prepare, and cook the food. Then no one is particularly thrilled to clean up and do the dishes either. Not all children naturally accept transition from consumer to producer, to where they no longer need to be told what to do and what was expected. I think we all have experienced that many adults are adults in name only and have the basic instincts and self-discipline of a 4-year-old. In the case of children, which is where I hear this statement the most frequently, it is an essential and necessary part of parenting to train them cognitively through repetition to do what you believe is right and good for them. You help them learn, and they eventually remember what your expectations and rules are. The repetition is absolutely unavoidable for anyone who is attempting to learn new things, and it is especially unavoidable for training those who are not fully developed yet. The last time this came up in family therapy was when a stepfather, rightfully frustrated that his 14-year-old stepdaughter could not remember to put the toilet seat down in a shared bathroom, and said, "I shouldn't have to keep telling her over and over again to do this." I agreed that it was frustrating and that he shouldn't tell her repeatedly to put the toilet seat down. My response was that he should make her responsible for remembering to do this, or else there would be some sort of consequence, instead of just repeating the same request again and again. If you are telling someone to repeatedly do something, and they either can't remember or choose not to do it, then stop this unhealthy process after the second or third time, and move on to assigning some sort of consequence for the behavior that you don't want to see continue. To just repeat a command repeatedly is to completely disarm yourself of all leverage and authority in the relationship. And any parenting situation is one where you are being depended on to have and use the authority for the betterment of who you have it over. Spare the rod and spoil the child is not a biblical mandate to spank your child. It's saying that the rod is a symbol of authority and that you should use this to direct behaviors for both the good of your offspring and society. To repeat a command repeatedly with no consequence for disobedience is to reduce it to nothing more than an emotional request, which gives them no motivation to comply. Interestingly, the stepfather in question noticed that his stepdaughter was wise enough to ask if she could place a post-it note by the toilet to help her remember. He was wise enough to see that this was a very adult effort to try and teach herself self-discipline, and he allowed her to do whatever it took to remind herself to remember to put it down. While I completely understand that the process of training young ones is exhausting and frustrating, I absolutely agree that you shouldn't be telling anyone of any age something repeatedly and let your words fall into thin air and become meaningless. If you haven't moved into the consequence phase after 2 or 3 violations, then the problem is all on yours, and deservedly so. People learn not only by remembering and repetition, but also by the response that they get to repeated actions. Both require the person on the other end to participate and not just passively stand by and watch. I believe the same rules apply when it comes to an employer and employee relationship too. To assume that an employee should automatically share your same investment in policies and procedures is to be in absolute denial of what the relationship is, and is a common generator of this belief that I shouldn't have to tell them to do this or that time and time again. I am fascinated when someone in a managerial position will complain endlessly about having to go behind their underlings and make sure the work is being done right and on time. Employees, in general, are not invested in the overall health of your business. There are always exceptions, of course, and are much more invested in what they will get out rather than what they are supposed to give. They are rarely able to be left alone without any accountability to perform tasks independently to perfection. I frequently remind people that if they were capable of doing this, then they wouldn't need a supervisor and you would be out of a job. Again, the cue to action is when you feel you have reminded someone of their job abilities enough times that you should have reasonably grasped it in the allotted time, and you are sure that the issue is laziness and a deliberate desire to not remember to do the right thing. At this point, we are back to the issue of consequences and giving some sort of meaningful, negative, and undesired response to cause the supervisee to think twice about being irresponsible or negligent in the future. Again, that's really what you are being paid to do as manager and supervisor. Make sure they do what they are paid to do and have agreed to do, and not to tell them over and over again just to do it. Accepting that people need structure and potential consequences to ensure accountability and productivity is the opposite of unreasonably expecting others to police and govern themselves independently. It is your job to provide the motivation for following rules and procedures, either from a position of encouragement or through consequences. That's what supervisors do. Up to this point, I've agreed with the complaint that I shouldn't have to tell them, on the understanding that it is excessive and that it is truly too much, and that we've bypassed an essential question. The important question is whether you really shouldn't have to be telling your son, daughter, coworker, employee, or girlfriend, boyfriend that same thing repeatedly, or whether you might be completely unreasonable in your perceptions and expectations. The reality is that we all learn through repetition. None of us can learn tasks and responsibilities without some guidance and some training. If you are in a supervisory role, as either a parent of a child or a manager of employees, it makes sense to accept that some repeating of what needs to be done is just a regular part of the role, and is helping them remember and internalize these things. It may be that you're avoiding this very simple reality that people can't train and teach themselves in most cases, and verbal direction is necessary. You also have a responsibility in these roles to reinforce the instruction with some type of response as well, as this is a big part of making the instruction stick, with either a positive one that is a pleasant reward or a negative response that is a correction. People all learn from your response as to what they do and the things that you direct them to do, and this process cannot happen without your willing participation. It's worth putting forth the effort in to get the It's worth putting the effort in to get the behaviors you want and need to have happen for your own benefit in order to make your daily life better. Do you agree? Now, when you say I shouldn't have to tell him/her what I want, when you're talking about your husband or wife, your fiance, or boyfriend or girlfriend, that is a completely different discussion altogether. One that probably deserves an entire chapter itself. It is perfectly natural to want our romantic partners to be able to perceive our needs and wants and to understand what we do and do not like, and so on. I'll sign off on that as true across the board for everyone, including me. I expect my wife to remember some basic things about what I like and don't like, or what I've done or not done, and to have certain amount of information stored away inside to draw on in basic transaction inside to draw on in basic transactions on a daily basis. She feels likewise, I'm sure. We would both expect a certain amount of remembering historical kinds of things to show that we were taking each other's needs and feelings seriously, and that they were important to one another. Again, reading this, I am doubting that you have any disagreement so far. And you have the basic expectations about your own relationship now and relationships in the past. The problem arises when these expectations get stretched from remembering basic likes and dislikes and people's places and things, and start to become expectations about what you are feeling and thinking in the moment. Educating our partners about what we think, feel, believe, want, and what brings out the best in us is a natural part of any relationship we're invested in, and so is expecting some of it to stick. If it doesn't, it might be proof of laziness, dependence, selfishness, or just not concentrating on the right things. I'm going to make the not very outrageous argument that expecting things to be remembered that are historical and physical, like a favorite color, dates of anniversaries, or what your favorite restaurant has always been, is a much different situation than expecting someone to remember things that aren't. Some of the biggest arguments I've ever seen in marital sessions are over one person expecting the other to know things that were not concrete and physical, and that were much more internal and personal things that the other person could not have reasonably guessed. At one session, I had a woman get upset with her fiancé because he took her shopping and didn't know what kinds of styles and dresses I liked to wear, and believed his inability to guess correctly was a sign that they weren't compatible. I thought the fact that he took her shopping at an upscale department store and spent 2 hours following her around the women's section while watching her look and try on clothes was a pretty good sign that he was invested. In this case, she clearly expected her fiancé to know things that were deep and private to her, and he likely couldn't have reasonably known unless they had some very serious discussions about this very subject. Now, he might have known, or should have known, that she didn't like blue jeans or never wore sleeveless blouses or tops if this was a matter of public record, but expecting him to remember specific styles or remembering specific styles or fabrics seems pretty unreasonable. In the cognitive behavioral world, we call this expression mind reading. In the cognitive behavioral world, we call this expectation mind reading. It's a term used to either describe the belief that you can somehow see others' private interpersonal feelings, motives, beliefs, or values, or when you expect someone else to automatically know what's in your private vaults. In this case, the I shouldn't have to tell them is about the latter and the expectation that someone should be able to magically see into your deepest and most personal mental space and know what you are thinking or feeling. Of course, this happens all the time. You should have known that I didn't want to go to the dinner party because I don't like Linda's husband. I should have known that you wanted the clothes put in the dryer even though we didn't discuss laundry today. You should have known that I wanted to go to Mass early this week because I have to get up earlier for work the day afterwards. I should have known that you were bothered by the heat and gotten you water before you had to tell me. You should have known I wanted to get romantic after we got home from dinner out at the Thai restaurant. And you're mad about it, or I'm mad about it, or one of us is hurt about it. On and on it goes, and these kinds of magical mind-reading arguments are what keep marriage counselors busy and divorce attorneys on speed dial. My guess is that maybe 20% of what we think, feel, want, and believe is actually able to be seen and recognized by even those closest to us. We have an immense amount of information traveling through our inner space that only we ourselves could ever know, and it is not transparent to anyone else. This means that we have an obligation to be self-aware enough to be able to have a good idea of what others can and cannot see about us. We also have an obligation to only expect our loved ones to know things about us that we've clearly displayed or communicated. You should know is a very dangerous thing to say. It is either truthful and a reasonable expectation that points out a real relationship lapse, or it's completely unreasonable expectation that can never be met by our partners, no matter how much they love us and invest in us and want to remember what is important to us. The trick is being able to tell the difference. Kayla came to therapy for 6 months before things started to change for her. The therapist was fairly patient in listening first and foremost to her numerous complaints, and validated that she felt exhausted due to the amount of things she was required to do for others. The sum total of her stress and exhaustion had taken a toll on her emotionally and physically. After this initial period of necessarily validating that her feelings were indeed important and worth consideration, the therapist began helping Kayla by reviewing these demands for her for instruction. The therapist used reality testing to see which demands were normal and expected for time and circumstance, and which ones were truly excessively demanding on her and were as a result of lazy dependence from others around her. In time, Kayla began to see that her expectations in many cases were unreasonable, and that she expected more from her children and employees than she should have, and that she was not doing the basic instruction and follow-through that was necessary to create the behaviors and habits and skills that she wanted desperately to see both personally and professionally. The real breakthrough did not happen until she had an argument with her unsuspecting husband over a pair of silver candlesticks in the garage that he suggested putting on Craigslist to clear out. She erupted into an angry and tearful outburst where she was despondent that her husband would even think of getting rid of something she inherited from her favorite aunt who passed away when she was in college, and how could he be so incredibly insensitive? His blank surprise was eventually followed by the truthful reminder that she had never really expressed much about her aunt, nor the candlesticks, and that they didn't even start dating seriously until after she had passed away. Sheepishly, Kayla realized that she had never expressed to her husband how deeply she felt about her aunt, and that these candlesticks were something that she had always admired, and that her aunt thoughtfully left them to her specifically in her will. Being forced to confront the fact that she had expected him to know something that somehow, despite having never been told, and that she had erupted in tears and anger on him, caused deep reflection and growing on her part. Kayla eventually brought her husband into therapy and decided to become clearer in communicating both her feelings and thoughts with him. And she can only assume and expect him to know what he could reasonably know, and disavowed the whole concept of mind reading. As a result, she found herself saying, "I shouldn't have to tell you," much less, and her anxiety and hurt feelings reduced